Hey everyone, welcome back. In this part of this tutorial, we're going to be having a deeper look at authentication tokens, and we have looked at these briefly in previous videos, but in this one we're going to be having a deeper look at how we use them, how we can use them to track the logged in user session. So let's jump in. So in our login form, when we click the login button and we run this workflow, call auth login, what exactly does that do? What do we mean when we say that we're logging in? How are we logging in by running that at the back end? So if we actually look at what it does with the login, as we've covered before, is we get an auth token. Now, just getting an auth token in and of itself is not going to log us in. All that getting an auth token does is to say that we have a key that we can then use in other API calls. So let's look at an example in the real world. Let's say the wristband that you get when you go to one of these all-inclusive resorts, or perhaps to a festival, a music festival. And when you first check in on the first day, then they'll give you a wristband. And then you can go around that resort, for example, and you can get in your room with that wristband. You can go and get food and drink. You can get into certain areas of the resort. Or if it's a festival, it means that you can get to certain stages or whatever it may mean. Or that tomorrow when you come, you can just walk through straight into the event because you've got your wristband. Well, let's look at the auth token as essentially your wristband, or the user's wristband, for using your app. So they come in, they log in with their details. We then make this API request, this auth login API request, and we get an auth token, effectively a wristband, that will then enable them to then get into access to other areas of your app. So just like in a resort, your wristband will get you into your room and other places around the resort. So what we've effectively been doing so far is clicking login, getting the auth token and throwing it away. We've not been using it. So it's the equivalent of getting your wristband and just getting a pair of scissors, cutting it, throwing it away, and then losing it, and then you won't be able to get into your room and you won't be able to do all the other things that you want to do in the resort. So obviously, just like you put the wristband and keep it on your wrist, we need some way of storing this. So what we would need to do then is that when the login API returns and with its response to give us the auth token, we then need to grab it and store it somewhere. So in an API call in Node-Craft, when the backend returns a response, that triggers an event on this API in this section here. So we click that, then we get the possible responses that trigger the relevant event that we can then put a workflow behind. So on here we've got on success. So if we just look at what it says, event is triggered when an API finishes successfully. So the user logs in, we get a response that's successful. That means we get an auth token. So now we can do something with the auth token in here. And obviously, as we've just been through, we're going to need to store it. So what we can do then is add that event here. So we just add this workflow, and then we can add an action then to store the auth token that we get back from Xano. So let's click to add an action, and we have this option here under cookies, set HTTP only cookie, and Node-Craft says that it saves a key value pair as a HTTP only cookie useful for storing JWTs or other tokens. Don't get caught up in that. All it means is that we can store an auth token that we get back from Xano, which is a JWT. Just as an aside, you don't really need to know that, just that a JWT is a certain format of auth token that Xano app happens to use. And so what Node-Craft gives us by running this action is the ability to save that auth token into an HTTP cookie, which essentially means that it's sort of stored in some encrypted way that we can then retrieve it, and it's protected. So what we need to do then is to run this action, and we can give it a name. So let's just give it the name of, Well, we'll leave it as access token for now, but if you had multiple HTTP cookies, then you'd have to give each one their own different name. We'll leave it as just access token just for ease for now. And the value is what we need to store into that HTTP cookie. And that is obviously the auth token that we get back from Xano. So all we need to do is to assign a dynamic value to the value of the cookie, is to click on formula, and then we can simply say that we want to look at the auth login API, we want the data that we get back, and then we want to store the auth token. So now we have the result that we get back from Xano when we run the login API. Now we're storing it. So now we've got our wristband on our wrist, or the user has got their wristband on their wrist to all intents and purposes. I'm overusing that, but you understand what I'm getting at. So how can we actually use this? Well, let's go into Xano and into our authentication API group. And here's the auth endpoints we've been working with. So at the minute we've worked with the login and we've worked with the sign up, but we haven't worked with me, auth me. Now the important thing here is we look over to the right hand side, we see that that says private. You look at login and you look at sign up, they're both public. So when we say private, that means that we can only run that API with a logged in user, or with the auth token of the current logged in user that we've just stored on the Nordcraft on the front end of the app. And so you can imagine then that every other API, or most APIs in the system, are going to be private. We're going to make sure that no one from the outside world can get at them unless they've been authenticated. And so every API, including this one, auth.me, is then going to require us to pass it that auth token. And so that is how we can use the auth token that we've now stored. So if I come back here into Nordcraft, and let's say I want to call that auth.me now. And auth.me, by the way, is just a way to get the user record belonging to your authentication token. Exactly what it says on the tin. It gets you the currently logged in user's details. And again, they're only logged in by virtue of having an authentication token. Okay, so let's set that one up. We'll come to APIs and we'll add it. And we'll drop down endpoints, and then we've got auth.me here that we can select from. Now at the moment, it runs straight away because we've got this auto fetch selected here. Let's just switch that off for now. But the response that we've got is that we've got an invalid token because we're not passing a token at the moment because we haven't logged anyone in. So again, I'll go through a couple of concepts here that don't worry too much if it doesn't click with you straight away. This will become clearer as we go through. Okay, but we've got this section here for a header. And if we click on that, we've got a header called authorization. This is the way by which we tell all of the private APIs what our authentication token is via the authorization header of the API call. Now, authorization headers are virtually always in the format of bearer space then the actual authentication token. So we have a look here, we're sending that up via a formula. So if you look, we're saying we want the bearer, and then we're going to want what is the HTTP only cookie, which is one that we've called access token. And that's what we called our HTTP cookie. So once we've logged in, this is what will get passed up automatically because Nordcraft has done this for us because we assigned Xano as a service. It's put this in there for us. Okay. So if we now run this, this will cause the login to execute. Once it comes back with a successful response, then we run this workflow, which is then going to store this cookie. We will then, because we've got that cookie stored, we will then be able to pass that as the header into the auth.me API, and then it will authenticate that user and give us that user's details. So let's try that. So let's run this. We've got the details already in, so let's click login. Okay, you've logged in successfully. And so now let's take a look at our auth me, and we'll just run it. And there we go. Now we've got Bill Smith's details here because we stored the authentication token, and in the header we passed it in here. We didn't even need to set this up. Nordcraft did that for us. So that's what we mean by logging in. We get an authentication token back from a login endpoint. We then store that authentication token, and for each private API that we then need to call, we can just pass that along as the authorization header of that API. So if we have a look at the data that we're getting back from this auth me endpoint, we're getting some information about the user, but we're not getting their name or their last name or their first name. And this is because of the changes that we made previously, where we got rid of the name field on the user and changed it to be a first name and a last name instead. So we come over to Xano and we go into the auth me endpoint. This step here, which is get record from user. And what we're interested in is the data that we get output from this step. So we go to the output tab here. And it says that we should be getting back the first name, but we're not getting back the last name. So let's click customize, and I'm going to tick the last name box. And so now that's telling us that we should get the last name back from the user. So let's click to save that. And now let's run it here. Okay, now we'll need to put an auth token in here if we haven't already, which generally just grab it from Nordcraft from the login and just run this again with valid details in, and it should generate a fresh auth token for you, and then just copy it from here, and then we can just paste it into this one. I've already done that before, so we can now click run, and yeah, now we're getting the first name, now we're getting the last name. Okay, so we should be good to go with that. Now, one step that we've covered previously that we're going to need to do is, while we can run that new version from in here, to be able to run that updated version from outside of Xano, i.e. from our own front end, we're going to need to publish that change. So let's come here and click publish now. And then we should be ready to go. So let's come in here and go to auth me. And let's try running that again. Okay, yeah, and this time we're getting our first name and our last name in there as well. So we're getting more information that we need in there. So at the moment, we're purely just calling this API through Nordcraft's own interface. We need to get it to run this from within our own form effectively. So when we were looking at our login on our events for on success, we were storing the cookie. So now what we want to do is to actually run our auth me after we've stored the cookie. So we've logged them in, we've got the auth token, we've saved the auth token with this step here, and now we need to go and run the auth me to get the details back, the user details back. So this step here, this action here, where we set the HTTP only cookie, where we store our auth token, is what we call an asynchronous call. Now, don't let that word kind of throw you. All of that means is that this step doesn't finish before it carries on to the next step that we can put in our workflow. So it's asynchronous. Two things are running at the same time. If it was synchronous, then this would finish and the next thing would carry on. What we want to do here is to store the cookie, store our auth token, and then once that's stored, then use that stored token to then run auth me to go and get us the user information back, let's say the name. Now we can't do that if we just put a step here to do that, so we can't just go here and say auth me, because this auth me relies on the auth token, and we've only just stored it. And because this is asynchronous, what will happen is this will get called before this has finished. So that's what we mean by asynchronous. So we can't do it that way. So what this workflow step does have, though, is a success event. So what this means is that when this has finished storing our auth token, then it's going to make available a success event that we can then respond to with a workflow. And so we're kind of having a workflow within a workflow here. So let's click on this, and this is where we want to call our auth me. And so now we can come in here and say auth me. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's cover it all so that we're quite clear about what's going on. So they click a button. We've got a click event on that button that then calls the auth login API. Our auth login API then comes back with a response by triggering this event, the onSuccess event, when we've got the answer back from the server. Then what we're doing is we're storing this cookie. So we're storing our auth token into a cookie so that it's remembered, so that we can continue to use it and use it and use it to call different APIs. When that's done, it's going to trigger a success event, and then we can do something once that is triggered, and that is to call the auth me API. And now, if everything worked correctly, then we should be able to do something with that user's information, such as maybe change this message here, you've logged in successfully, and maybe then change their name. So let's come into this success message. The moment it just says you've logged in successfully, let's make this more dynamic so that we can include their name. So I'm going to use a formula called concatenate, which basically lets you concatenate multiple texts into one. So you've logged in successfully. Let me just come here and add a comma and a space, and then we're going to say that we want to grab from the auth me data first name, we'll add a space into that one, and then this one we will just say that we want to show the last name. So the result will be you've logged in successfully, Bill Smith, or whatever the username happens to be. So let's try that out in the browser, and let's pop in the details. Okay, you've logged in successfully, Bill Smith. So there is just like delay with the Bill Smith because it's got to store the cookie and then it's got to go back to the server and go and get the details. And so now we've been able to grab our user information from the auth me API immediately when they've logged in. So generally we wouldn't need to do this, because what we would actually do is to take them directly from the login page directly to the main app page, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in the next video. So thanks for watching. Again, appreciate you sticking with me. Don't forget the link in the description if you're interested in any of my upcoming courses where we go into more intermediate and advanced stuff. Then that's what those courses will cover. You can sign up for the wait list on there and just let me know that you'd be interested in them. But again, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.